William O. Stoddard served as secretary for President Lincoln between 1861 and 1865. Stoddard's granddaughter, Eleanor, and Lincoln scholar Harold Holzer collaborated on this new edition of his 1907 autobiography. This is about 10 minutes.
We have a special mini program to start our session this afternoon. And it's particularly special to me because it's about a book that I had a hand in. You see the modest book jacket cover I have here. The book is Lincoln's White House Secretary. And it is the autobiography of a man who had been known for generations as Lincoln's third secretary, because he came after Nicolay and Hay, no other reason. His name was William Osborn Stoddard, and he was quite a remarkable individual. And he wrote an absolutely gripping memoir that I had heard about vaguely. It had appeared in a very truncated edition 50 years ago, edited by his own family. Well, I met, through a great stroke of luck, William Osborn Stoddard's granddaughter. And she asked if, we have a dispute about this, she'll give her version of the story. She asked if I might bring out an annotated, authoritative, and more complete edition of the autobiography of her grandfather. And this is the result. Dazzling writing, great recollections, a lot of opinions. You know, this fellow was amazing. But even more amazing is the fact that we have here today, it's not her first visit to the forum, but it's still amazing, a person who touched the hand of someone who touched the hand of Abraham Lincoln. And that's pretty extraordinary. So I all want you to meet, for her own take on this enterprise, Eleanor Stoddard.
Well, I think I'm the show and tell, but anyway. Harold, of course, he's a great promoter, but what really happened was that I knew Harold somewhat, and I had these tomes that my grandfather had typed out, the autobiography that he did for his children, which ran to 700 pages and were bound, and I was doing my will, and I had to think, where will I tell somebody to put these things? So I called him up and I said, Mr. Holzer, can you tell me where I could put these volumes that my grandfather wrote? And he said, well, yes, in the Warren Museum in Indianapolis, wherever it is. So, and then there was a pause, and Harold said, Miss Stoddard, would you permit me to edit that book? And I said, what? Would you really want to do that? So I said, okay, go ahead. So he got a hold of Southern Illinois University Press, and this is 1996, and signed a contract. And then he and I had a contract about how we would relate to each other if this happened. And I was permitted to, check it for errors, things like that. So anyway, it kind of languished for quite a while, and we kept renewing our contract. And finally, there was a deadline of 2005. And I got in touch with Harold, and I reminded him that this was deadline year. And by golly, he had started, and he'd already done a whole lot of footnotes. And I want to urge any of you who buy the book, do read the footnotes. They are wonderful, although they're all tucked in the back, so you have to keep, doing this. But anyway, Harold told me that I should try to remember or tell people what I could remember of my grandfather, which is not much, because he died when I was 4 years old. But he was very old, and he was really, beginning to kind of go out of this world, and he was in a bed upstairs in this house where we were taking care of him. And somebody put my little brother, who was a baby, on his bed, and my brother crawled toward him and started to pull his beard. And my grandfather said, take him away, take him away. And that's mostly what I remember. But he was sort of a mythological figure in our family. And what I knew about him was that, of course, he was absolutely tied into Lincoln. I was aware that he was Lincoln's secretary, but that didn't mean a whole lot to me. but he also had a reputation for being a wonderful shot. And I knew that he had been sent to Arkansas, where he bravely faced all these wicked guerrillas, and well, he did, actually, and that's in the book. But that's not the main thing. And he also was a writer, and he wrote many, many books, mostly for boys. And my mother read those to my brother at bedtime, and they were very good. And he is very, very descriptive. I think Harold would agree. And I think really his descriptions of Lincoln are really nifty. They're really wonderful. And I think they give pictures which are unique. I mean, they're not anywhere else. So that's kind of fun. And I guess that's about the main thing that I can tell you about him, that he was, he moved to Madison, New Jersey for his old age, and that's where he's buried. And he of course, became a kind of a town icon. Every time Lincoln's birthday came around, the newspaper editor would come around and interview my grandfather, so I was aware of that. And what else can I tell you? I think I just say read the book.
For someone who claims not to have remembered her grandfather, she was a thorough, approaching merciless editor of this material. She knows everything about the Stoddard family, and it's an upstate New York family from the same town as the artist Francis Carpenter, who painted the Emancipation Proclamation painting of Lincoln. They were actually buddies, and Stoddard was very much a player in the effort to get the Emancipation Proclamation painting acquired by the Congress. He helped find a patron to pay for it, basically, because Congress didn't want to do it itself. Stoddard is quite a character. I mean, some of the recollections he has of going over documents in the middle of the night, the Emancipation Proclamation being thrown on his desk, a demand being made, read this for proof, and he starts reading it and doesn't know what it is, and he gets, a few sentences in and realizes that he's reading something that's going to transform history and has been entrusted with the responsibility of making it perfect. He never pretends that he's an intimate of Lincoln's. He says that Lincoln was the man in the inner office. He was summoned. He did tasks for him, but ultimately he gets more responsibility and has a role to play in the enfranchisement movement of African Americans in Washington. He's sent to the Baltimore Convention in 1864 to be one of the agents for Lincoln on the scene for the renomination. And most interestingly to me, because it was entirely new, was the fact that he was indeed sent to Arkansas to be a marshal, one of the federal marshal of the territory. And I think if you worked in the White House, you sort of reached the exhaustion level and got a better job. Nicolay was getting a better job when Lincoln was assassinated. He was going off to Europe. And there's this wonderfully poignant scene, and it's beautifully described, and I will leave it at that, but that there is a moment when, and Stoddard is having a tough time in Arkansas, filled with rebels who aren't giving up easily. And he's maintaining loyalty to Lincoln and trying to promote loyalty to the Union in this bastion of Southern sentiment. And he hears this noise from the street in the spring and doesn't know what's going on. It's early in the morning of the 15th of April, 1865. And when he gets downstairs, he's told that the president has been assassinated. He can hardly believe it because just a few months before he was in his presence every day. And it's very moving. He doesn't know what to do, so he writes to Nicolay and Hay and just sort of tries to connect about this great man that we had the privilege of knowing. So if you care about the inner office of Lincoln and the inner workings of the administration, I recommend it not as my enterprise, but as a recollection of a person who was right there at the center of things, William O. Stoddard. Thank you.